Hello and welcome to the Sterling podcast. I'm Julia Williams, your host, and today I'm really excited because I've got Nick French, a leadership coach from Ceniril Coaching, joining me. Now, Nick doesn't just help leaders excel in their role, but he also helps them sleep at night. Because let's face it, when you're a leader, how many sleepless nights do you have? So, Nick, welcome. It's great to have you here. How are you?
I'm very well and very excited to be here and to share this podcast space with you. I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Oh, you're welcome. Well done. So, Nick, look, you've got a really interesting background. It would be really great if you could share with our listeners, really, give us a brief summary of, what did you do beforehand, before you came into leadership coaching, and what really brought you there?
Yes, certainly. I'm going to go all the way back to my school days. I went to the local grammar school. I did all right. I did okay up until a point, and fell out of love with education towards the end of my time there. I didn't go to university, much to the disappointment of my parents and the school. And I'd been working part-time at McDonald's and decided to stay there, which didn't go down very well. But interestingly, that's where the journey really started, because 4 months after my A-levels finished, I was stepping into my first manager's role at the age of 18. And then if I think about the following, I suppose, 15 years, I spent that period of time learning, making loads of mistakes along the way. I wasn't a very good leader for a long time, but I learned from those mistakes. My time at McDonald's ended when I decided I couldn't see any route for progression. I was working for a franchisee at the time, and although that was an amazing experience, there was no route to progression. So I moved into a different sector and went to DIY retail with Wix, and enjoyed my time there mostly. But again, found that I'd got to a point after 11 years where I couldn't see the route to progress. And I moved into builders merchants and went to work for Travis Perkins, who owned Wix at the time. And that's where things really started to accelerate. So I worked for 3 years running one of the biggest Travis Perkins in the country, and then was successful in that period of time, got promoted, became a regional manager and then a regional director. And the time as a regional director in the West Midlands was probably one of the most fruitful times I had. If I think about that 5 year period, apart from the COVID year, which nobody really talks about anymore, we had record years all the way through. And that's when I really kind of honed my craft as a leader, which led me to being approached to take on a role in a different part of the group. And I was asked to go and run the Southeast for one of the specialist businesses, BSS. That was the biggest profit generating region in the whole group, and had another record year there, and then got promoted and was on the board of directors for 18 months with BSS before I left. So I learned over a long period of time. And in education, there's a lot of talk about squiggly careers because young people don't have the same concept that we do of a job for life. And my career has definitely been squiggly. I've moved between roles, between organisations, geographical locations, and learnt loads as I've gone along the way. And leadership has always been that thing that's really fired me up and made me excited about what I do.
What I'd be interested to know, though, Nick, what's the defining moment that you felt that being a leader coach was for you? Why did you choose to become a leadership coach? Was there a defining moment that you thought, yes, this is what I really want to do?
I think the defining moment, and I'll share it with you, it's quite a personal one, but the defining moment was really the point where I went, okay, so coaching, this is different. There's something special about this. And in the summer of 2020, I was coached for 6 months through to the beginning of 21 by an executive coach, a lady who left a profound mark on my life. And we started our journey in the August of that year, and it was part of my development towards a senior board role. So I was really excited about it. And we had our first session online, similar sort of setup to this. And she asked me loads of questions, as coaches do. And she was really, she said very little and listened a lot. And there I am spouting away, talking about all the stuff I do. And I was talking about how I set a really high standard and I'm relentless and, driven and all this good stuff. And how I have to set a great example and I want my kids to be proud of me and I can't let anything slip. And she created a beautiful moment of silence. I can even feel it now. I can remember it that much. Probably 5 seconds. And she looked at me and she went, "Nick, you must be exhausted." And it was like someone hit me in the face with a shovel. And it probably took 2 days for that to sink in. So the weekend, this was a Thursday. On the Saturday, I'm stood in my garden doing the most unglamorous job in the world, pegging the washing out. And this thought had been bouncing around in my head for 2 days. And I just burst into tears.
Wow.
And my wife came out and said, "What's the matter? Are you all right?" I went, "No, I'm not." That was the defining moment because I realised, the way that I was working was going to catch up with me at some point because I was putting too much pressure on myself. But the skill with which Emma, that was the lady I was working with, saw that, asked exactly the right questions, but said the right things, made me realise just how powerful this experience was.
Yeah.
I thoroughly enjoyed my time as being coached.
Mm.
And I took some of the things that I experienced with Emma into the way that I manage my teams. And at that point, I was managing branch managers that came in all shapes and sizes. But in my later time in BSS, I was managing regional directors. So I was managing, leading bigger animals, bigger, more well-rounded people. And I had to be more of a coach. So it really stood me in good stead. But that was the defining moment, if I could pick one.
And leadership's coaching's obviously had a huge impact on you. But how has your experience of leadership coaching? How does it influence the way you coach now, or your experience of leadership? In fact, how has that had an impact on the way you coach now?
That's quite an interesting question because coaching comes in lots of different varieties. I chose to be qualified as a coach and take an accredited qualification, which took me 6 months. And the coaching industry is unregulated, so you don't have to do that. And I wanted to be able to demonstrate that I'd achieved a certain standard. And one of the things that course taught me was there is let's call it a pure way of coaching. And coaching is all about helping people find their own solutions. And that's really powerful. My natural style isn't quite like that. My natural style is more collaborative. I can step into different conversations that might be more akin to a mentoring space where I'm happy to share, albeit very lightly, my experiences and perspectives that will help the people I work with to step into different places. So my experience of leadership coaching and being trained as a leadership coach has defined the way that I work with my clients. And, I still work within the tram lines that the industry expects when you're accredited. But I do it my very own way. And that means sometimes I won't be the best coach for some people. And I'm really comfortable with that. I don't have to be everybody's coach.
Yeah.
But there are people out there that I'll be the best coach for, and those are the people I want to spend time with.
In your experience, what's the most common leadership challenges, would you say, that business owners face?
I think you can dress it up in a couple of different ways, but for me, they're fundamentally the same thing, and that's confidence and imposter syndrome, because imposter syndrome shows up as a result of confidence.
Yeah.
I know people who run multi-million pound businesses, big corporations, who have suffered with imposter syndrome. I know people who run one-man band operations that take, very small amounts of money that have imposter syndrome.
Mm.
And it's one of the most debilitating things that a business owner or a leader can experience. And I think that is by far and away the most common thing I come across. And actually, that's the thing I like to spend the most time helping clients with, because there are so many ways that you can cope with that kind of thing.
Mm,
And the toolkit that I employ to help clients with that particular challenge is big, and I've
mm,
got lots of ways of helping them navigate imposter syndrome.
mm,
So I would say that's definitely the biggest. I also think, depending on who's in front of you, there's an element of, if you're having a pure coaching conversation and helping someone to find their own solutions, then that's great. And you can really get them thinking. And I'm really comfortable doing that. But there will be times where a client will look at me and just say, I just need something. I don't know the answer.
mm,
And if you stick to your guns as a pure, from a pure coaching perspective, I think sometimes you might miss the opportunity to give them something
mm,
that will accelerate their progress.
mm.
It doesn't mean that you tell them what to do, because that's not how we do things.
Yeah.
But you give them something that they can experiment with, they can try. And if it doesn't work, that's absolutely fine. But I like to keep that real fluidity in the way that I approach my
Mm.
clients. So there will be times when they just don't know what they don't know.
Do you know what I love about you, Nick, is your honesty. And, we've spoken before when you said that earlier on in McDonald's that you probably weren't the best leader. And that's a very honest thing to say. But, from your experience working with various leaders, how does leadership, or I would say maybe sometimes a lack of it, show up in terms of business successes and struggles?
Yeah, I think that can be quite a broad spectrum of things.
Mm,
For me, leadership is about creating a really strong sense of vision and purpose,
mm,
and creating an environment where people will follow you on that journey.
mm,
And leaders who struggle with creating vision and purpose will then struggle to get people to go on the journey with them, because not everybody can be a visionary leader.
mm.
There are people in organizations who join and want to do a great job, but have no desire to be the boss or the CEO or whatever. So they need someone that they can anchor to. And if a leader doesn't have vision and that strong sense of purpose and understand what their mission and their vision and their values are, they can't create that direction.
Yeah.
So I think that shows up quite strongly in some instances when I talk to clients. And that's not to say that they're bad leaders, but if they haven't got clear themselves about what direction they're going in, how can they expect to take anybody along with them?
Very
And
true.
actually, I have a lot of success when we zone in on mission, vision, and values.
Mm,
And I liken it, it's a terrible analogy, but I'll share it with you anyway. I liken it to a coat hanger. So, a coat hanger has 3 points, and coat hangers are things that everything hangs off.
mm,
If you get your mission, vision, and values right in your organization, everything hangs off them. And actually, when I use that analogy with clients, you can see the light bulb going on. And when we spend time on those three things, the rate of progress from that point onwards is often very, very, very quick and very encouraging, because it just creates that solid foundation for people to work from.
yeah. Nick, in terms of, you've had lots of experience in different leadership roles, and I know you've changed, but what's the one piece of advice that you could give to, I suppose, a leader that feels stuck in their role?
Um, can I have two?
If you want to be greedy, that's fine.
Um, I think if you feel stuck,
Mm,
it's not uncommon for that leader to be putting a lot of pressure on themselves. And I think that creates a spiral of anxiety, imposter syndrome, confidence dipping, all those kind of things. So I think, in terms of a piece of advice, one of the first things that I would sort of share with someone in that situation is take a step back and be kind to yourself.
yeah,
Acknowledge
that's
the
very
things,
important.
yeah, acknowledge the things that are working, and then no matter how small they are, they can be encouragement to move on to something that will make a bigger difference. Interestingly, I was with a client yesterday. This client's a junior manager in an organisation, and we had exactly this conversation because they were spending so much time dwelling on the things that weren't going well, that they weren't recognising the things that were going well. And we were able to reframe their thinking to the point where the light bulb was going off everywhere. And the client said to me, how do you know what's in my head better than I do? The second piece of advice is less a piece of advice to help someone with leadership, but it's a piece of advice I was given when I was first given a regional role by someone I hold in the highest regard. He's been a guiding light for me for many years, now retired. And he said, our job is to make a difference. And he then went on to say that when we go into our branches as regional directors, it is one of the most important things that our people experience. And he even said, which I never quite came to terms with, that sometimes when we're visiting, it's like God visiting. I felt quite uncomfortable with that concept.
Yeah.
But it was interesting that over the period of time I did that role, I could see what he was trying to tell me. And my job was to make a difference and to make the people's lives in my branches easier and more pleasant to work in. So that was a piece of advice I always hold dear, is a leader's job is to make a difference.
And, you talk about the advice, but also let's just now flip it over and look at habits. What's one small, perhaps, but powerful habit you think every business leader should adopt or do?
God, one.
Just one, Nick, just one.
Okay, I'm going to stick to one. We've talked about this recently. Leadership can be a really lonely place. And if you're an entrepreneur or you're running a small business, it might just be you. Even if you're running a business with a few people in, you might not necessarily have the people around you that you need. And I think if I was going to give one piece of advice at this point, I would say find those people around you that can give you the things you haven't currently got, whether that's a sounding board, whether that's someone who will tell you the things you don't want to hear, because quite often as human beings, we attach ourselves to the people who are telling us what we do want to hear because it's easier. So by opening yourself up to someone telling you the things you don't want to hear, you're giving yourself the opportunity to grow. So I'd say that would be a really prominent piece of advice, is find out those people who can add the dimension that you're most in need of.
And, today leadership is very, very different, I presume, to what it was like 10, 20, 30 years ago, because people have changed, the way we are has changed. But in emotional intelligence is something that crops up time and time again. How do you feel emotional intelligence really plays a part in modern leadership?
Well, let me just, before I answer that question, let me just give you a compare and contrast, because you said leadership's changed.
Yeah.
So in 1985 and 1986, when I was a young lad, 86, 87 actually, first management role, and the world was a different place.
Yeah.
And I ruled by fear. I made the early part of my career about shouting at people until I got the result I wanted. And it worked to a point. And it was interesting that the defining moment then was one of my closest friends turned around to me one day and went, everybody hates you, don't you? And I kind of went, what? Of course they don't. And he went, oh, believe me, they do. And I had to stop and think, and I had to change the way I worked. To go to your question, emotional intelligence is about the connections you make with people. And it plays very nicely into a style of leadership that I've first unconsciously and now consciously hold the most dear, which is the concept of servant leadership. You're not in charge. you're in charge of that you're not responsible for the organization, you're responsible for the people in the organization, because they're the ones that make things happen. So as a leader, it's absolutely critical to understand that those people that you surround yourself with every day are the ones that make your life easier and your business successful. Now, if you're a one-man band, that's really difficult because you've only got yourself, but you can still create a network around you. But emotional intelligence is about the connections you make, whether it be through a team or through suppliers or through networking connections, and understanding what makes people tick is really, really powerful. And if you put other people's needs first, you get it paid back
Yeah.
umpteen times over.
Now, Nick, you and I are very similar in terms of the way we think, in terms of, every day's a school day, and we're always trying to learn, develop better ourselves. What could you recommend to leaders to help them grow and develop, whether it be a book or podcasts, a type of resource? Is there one thing that stands out to you? You think, oh, definitely read, watch that.
I'm going to go with three things just
Oh,
because I need to break the rules, but I'll keep them all brief. If you're a short form content type of person, TED Talks are the best thing to go to, and there are millions of them on every subject that a leader or business owner would want. They're both sides of the pond. You've got a lot of American ones, you've got a lot of British ones. They are thought leaders, experienced people, influential and inspirational people talking about real experiences. And I think TED Talks is a really good way of engaging people when you're doing what I do for a living, and I use them all the time. In terms of a podcast, this might sound a little bit strange, but I think Stephen Bartlett does a great job
yeah.
in The Diary of a CEO. And if you've got the time and the inclination, I would urge you to go back to the beginning,
Oh,
because Stephen Bartlett, and he even leans into this himself, when he first started that, I think it was 6 years ago, quite frankly, he was not doing himself and CEOs any favours, because he was operating in a way that was quite self-centred, quite egotistical. He wore the fact that he had 2 hours sleep like a badge of honour. He wore the fact that he did 20-hour days like a badge of honour. And I went back to the beginning, and I gave up after about 20 episodes because I was disgusted by what I was hearing. When you listen to him now, the journey he's been on, I mean, he's an incredibly clever guy, hugely successful. But the most powerful thing about Stephen Bartlett is that he's learned his own lessons, and he's a really credible person. You're not just the success he's had and the money he makes, but his personal journey is one to be admired. So I think there's so much in his podcasts. And then a book. I'm going to go with one that I read last year, which is James Clear's Atomic Habits. And it's not necessarily written for managers and leaders, but in it, James Clear talks about the way in which you can create good habits. And he gives a really simple way of creating good habits and also deconstructing bad habits. It's really easy to follow. It's really easy to read. And it's every time I share a snippet from it with someone, it makes a difference. And I've adopted many of his principles in my own routines, and they're game changers.
So Nick, final question for you, because you and I could talk all day. In one sentence, how would you sum up leadership?
Leadership is creating an opportunity for your organization, the people around you, to be at their very best. And you can measure success in loads of different ways. So that might be monetary, it might be in terms of promotions and status, it might be social value, it might be sustainability, it could be anything. But great leaders create conditions for people to be successful with vision and purpose, with putting those people first. So I would say that is the quickest way I could sum it up. Being as you've put me on the
Fantastic.
spot and not given me much more to.
No, Nick, honestly, it's been a dream to talk to you and so interesting as well. I'm sure our listeners will really enjoy finding out more about you and Ceniril coaching. There'll be details of how to get hold of you on the link below. But thank you very, very much indeed, Nick. Thank you.
No, thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Absolute pleasure.